Okay, what I've decided to do is I've decided to answer like questions that I get on my Facebook page, but just do like little video blogs on it. I just think that it's easier than me just keep writing out loads of stuff, because I do get asked the same questions time and time again. So what I want to go through today with you guys is level line casting fishing. What I mean by that is, on a lot of lakes these days, in fact most lakes I would say, we're not allowed to use leaders, but people still want to be able to cast at range. Now, casting without leaders at range is a balance between getting the lines thin enough so that you'll cast to where you want to be, but also they have to be thick enough that you don't snap off. And nobody wants to leave rigs in a lake where you're getting crack offs all the time. So the tackle that we use is really important to get the balance right. Okay, so what I want to do is just run through what I advise everybody to use for level line casting. That's without leaders, remember, without leaders. The thing is with like casting, you know, when you're hearing about all these huge distances and all that, they're often done with braided leaders, 10-pound line. Now, you know, in the UK especially, where is that allowed? There's not many places, and also it's always best to use the strongest lines you can to reach the spot you can get, so that you can actually land the fish safely. If you're using 10-pound line and braided leader, it's hard to land fish, like big fish in weed and all that. I just wouldn't advise it. So level line casting is a really important skill to have, and it's a very common question. So let's have a look at what I advise for level line casting. Okay, let's just go through the tackle. I've been casting down the field here again today. Spend a lot of my time down this field either teaching people or just playing around with tackle and just testing things. Okay, so let's have a look what I've been using. And with level line casting, I've had casts over 170 meters, which is 180, say 185 yards, without a leader. Now that is top end. Okay, if you're achieving 150 yards with a bait, you're right on the limits anyway, because 150 yards with a bait is on the verge of snapping lines. Remember that you're limited to how far that you can cast with level line. So let's go through my tackle. Okay, I've got it here in front of me. I'm sitting on like a bucket in the middle of a field, and I'm just gonna show you what I use a lot for level line fishing or casting, whatever. Okay, so what I've got here, okay, let's start with the reel. And that reel there that I've got is a Ultegra. It's a C14 Ultegra 1400. And what I like about reels for level line casting, where you're using quite thick lines, is the spool is quite big. Now, the reason I like bigger spools, okay, rather than say the 5.500 size reels or some thinner spooled reels, is because with thick line, if you wrap that round a small spool, it comes off curly. And what I'm trying to do is look after my line, okay? You've got to look after your line, especially, as I say, with level line casting, we're using thick lines, okay? So that's a 1400 Ultegra reel, okay? I'm not saying it's the only reel that you have to use. There's a lot of good big pit reels, but this is the one that I like, okay? So that's the reel. Let's have a look at the line, which is probably one of the most important things that you've got to choose when you're level line casting, okay? And it's not always the brand, because I use a lot of lines over the years. It's the thickness of the line that you have to get right, okay? Now, I'm going to tell you that the minimum diameter line that you should be using, level line, is 0.35 mil, okay? You shouldn't be going thinner than 0.35 mil. I don't care what the breaking strain is stated, I always go by diameters, okay? And 0.35 is the thinnest that I would go with level line casting. This line here is actually a 0.38 mil, okay? And I reckon 0.37 to 0.38 is the perfect like diameter for level line casting, okay? That's going to give you strength, and that's going to give you a thin enough line to cast, okay? I sometimes go up to 4.0 and 4.3 even if it's snaggy, but 3.7 to 3.8 is a really good line to choose, okay? Now, also you've got to be aware about is that when you choose your line, you've got to have a look if it's a pre-stretched, low-stretched line, or it's got a bit of stretch in it. Now, when you're casting, okay, you're creating shock. When you cast, you create a shock. And if that line has got no stretch in it, it's already been pre-stretched, it's more likely to snap. So I prefer a line with a little bit of stretch in it as well, okay? So you're looking for a 3.7 to 3.8 line, which is going to be around about 15 to 20 pound, I would say, with a little bit of stretch in it, okay? So that's the line sorted out. You've got your reel sorted out, you've got your line sorted out. Now rod, another important choice to make. With rods, for casting or long range fishing, I always prefer 13 footers, but the action of the rod is very important as well. What you don't want is a rod that's too stiff a tip, too stiff a butt, because as I said, when we cast, you create shock, and if that rod doesn't bend or is too stiff, it's going to create more shock on that mono, which is going to snap the line, especially if you've chosen a pre-stretched line as well. So you go to cast, the line's got no give, the rod hasn't got much give, you're going to snap off, okay? So the rod choice, obviously some people have got their rod and they're not going to get like and change their rod, so you've really got to look at your line. But if I had to choose a rod, I would choose a 13 foot semi-fast action, a rod that's got that bends throughout the whole rod but still stiff enough to cast a long way, okay? And I'm lucky because I've been around Europe and I teach people quite often, like 3 times a week, and I get to try all the rods, okay? And one particular rod that's actually really surprised me over the past year of using it is this one. And I know that I work for Shimano at the minute, so people can say, well, you would say that because you're working for Shimano. I don't mind giving advice on all rods, but this rod has really shocked me, okay? And it's not even expensive. TX2, Shimano TX2 13 footer, okay? Now this rod's about 100 quid, okay? And I've had level line casts, as I said earlier on, over 170 meters with it. I've had leader casts over 240 yards with it, okay? And to this day, I have not broke one, okay? I've also got good friends who fish for the England team and they are using this TX2. So you don't have to spend loads of money. There is fantastic more expensive rods, but this one's also really, really good. It's the 13 foot version, okay? And the rod's the wrong way round, so let me just show you this. Bosh. There you go, look. TX2, okay? That's the rod that I've been using, 13 footer. I really like this for level line casting. Now, we talked about the action. It's more of a semi-fast. It bends throughout the rod so it absorbs the shock. But another thing that a lot of people like to debate and talk about is guide sizes. Now, for me, like, there is no debate, okay? Because all the best casters I know, all the records I've cast or seen cast have been with 50 mils and above, okay? Some people use bigger than 50 mils. But for level line casting, I think 50 mils are really important. And I'm going to tell you why. You've got a big spool reel, so it looks after your line, so it's not as coiled up. you've got quite a thick line, 3/8 mil, and as you cast, that is going to throw off this coil, okay? It's going to throw off like a big coil. Now, what you can do, you can either funnel it down with a 50 mil, have a bit of friction on that guide, then go down to a 30 mil, have a bit of friction on that guide, and that's how I prefer to do it to control the line. Or you can have a little 40 or sometimes even a 30 mil and create a load of friction on the first guide, okay? That takes the sting out of the cast early. If you take the sting out of the cast early, there's nothing left. So for me, you always want a 50 mil ring in, okay? Also, you throw a big coil off, it can create fraps if you've got a small guide, okay? Unfortunately, we're always going to get fraps. K-series, like I have fraps on them. You're always gonna, unfortunately, now and again have a frap. It don't matter who you are, it can happen, okay? So 13 foot semi-fast rod, but still got enough stiffness in it to cast. Remember, it's still got to recover quick, okay? So this is just a 100-pound rod TX2, okay, 13 footer. It's performed brilliant for me, okay? So that's the rod, reel and line sorted. Now we've got to go on to the rig. Now, I'm not going to tell you about rigs today because that's for another time maybe, but there's one really important bit, okay, when we get down to the rig end, and that's the knot attaching your main line to the rig, okay? You might use tubing, you might use a small lead core leader or whatever, but that is going to be one of the weakest points. You've got to create a strong knot. Now, I'm just going to ship this rod back to get to my rig. And what I've got here, okay, I've just got a normal lead clip, 4-ounce lead, but I've got a little, and it's tied here with a little knot. You can just see that I've left a bit of a tag there just in case for any slippage. Don't really get any, but I just prefer to do that, okay? Right, and the knot I'm using there is called the Palomar knot. Now, the Palomar knot, in my tests of casting, I'm not talking about slow pulls. You can't test a cast with a slow pull, okay? We're all about shock. It's been very, very efficient for me, and it's been very, like, reliable. So I just tie a Palomar knot. Now, if I had tubing here, I would just tie the Palomar knot to the lead clip, okay? So that is really important, okay? That knot is going to be the weakest link in your cast. Now, the other thing that we've got to go on to, I'll just take it off, is the lead weight, okay? Now, with level line casting, you have to have a weight that's heavy enough to pull out the heavy line. If you use a 3-ounce lead, that lead's going to fly off really quick, but it hasn't got the weight and momentum to carry on that speed. It will slow down very quick, okay? So it won't go as far. Also, if you're fishing at range and you've got a 3-ounce lead on a hard spot and you're trying to tighten that line up, you might even move that lead without even knowing it because it hasn't got the weight. Say 130 yards, it hasn't got the weight and you might be moving the lead. So my advice for level line casting, okay, I always use a zip lead. I've got a zip lead here. I always use a zip lead, and I always use a 4-ounce with level line casting. Sometimes if it's windy, I will go up to a 4.5-ounce lead. Of course, that's going to put more strain on the line, so you've got to be a bit more careful. But 4-ounce really will do me up to 130 yards, which for level line casting is quite a good cast, okay? Remember, you're limited to around 150 yards with a bait. And that's not because, say I'd be limited to 150 yards. It's not because I can't cast further. It's because over that, I've got a big chance that I might snap that line. If I go to a stronger line, you might not get the distance because the line's too thick. So that's the balance all the time, okay? Shaper lead, I always use zip leads. I just prefer them. That's what I've used in my competitions. That's what I use in my fishing. In my bucket, I've got leads between 3 and 5 ounces, and nearly every one of them's a zip lead. That's just what I use, okay? So I hope that's answered any question. If you have got anything else you want to ask, of course, just ask me on Facebook, and I do try and get back to everybody as soon as I can. I've got no problem answering like questions on anything, so just private message me, and like, I'll do my best to help. So I hope that clears up a little bit level line casting like without leaders. It's very popular now on all lakes, and it's a skill that we have to get right, because if you can fish at range well, you might get a few more fish, and end of the day, that's what it's all about. Right, so I've just done that little video. On what setup I use for my casting, okay? Let's get this camera right. Bit lower, kneeling down, my tripod ain't that tall. Right, so I've just done that little video on the tackle that I use and what I advise for level line casting, okay? Now I'm just gonna have like a couple of casts down this field where I always cast, and what you have to remember about level line casting, as I was saying before, it doesn't like shock, okay? So the casting technique has to be a little different when you're casting level line. What you've got to try and do is build the cast up slowly to a faster finish. If you shock it too early, you're going to snap that line. That's why, as I was saying before, that I like more through action rods. There's more margin for error because it's going to bend. A stiffer rod, as I said before, if it's too stiff, you're going to cast and snap that line quite a bit. So let me have like a couple of casts, okay? Same setup as I said before, 0.38 line, Ultegra, TX2 4-ounce lead. I'm going to have a couple of casts. It won't look as fast as when I'm casting with braided leaders, because I can attack the cast. But with this one, it's more about feel. So let's have a few casts just to finish like this little bit of video off, and you'll be able to see what I'm doing, and we'll get a measure out there and just see how far it goes. I mean, that for this video is not the important bit for me, but it'll be just nice to see, won't it? The wind, like the conditions on this field as usual, I got a southerly coming across me. It's about 15 miles per hour, so I'm actually hiding behind the van to film this so that the camera don't pick up the sound of the wind too much, and I hope you can hear me. Have a few casts, then we'll see what happens, and that's going to be like that end of the video really, and I just hope it helps. Right, I've just had 3 casts. The first 2 went about 150 metres, so I've put a mark out in a field at 150 metres. That's 165 yards, okay? And that with 3/8 line, 3/8 to 4/0 is quite, for me, is quite comfortable casting, okay? As I said, this video is not about trying to cast as far as you can, this is about fishing, okay? So I'm safe up to these distances. So I've just had my last cast. Let's have a look and just see where it's gone. I'm going to reel in, and I'm going to try and hold my phone as I'm reeling in as we wind down to this wheel. Let's see where it's landed. Okay, so as I said, I've got to wind down to my lead now, because the good thing about casting over fields is, especially at this time of year after a bit of rain, the leads stick in all the time. And the good thing about a lead sticking in is, even though it gives you a lot of exercise as I keep walking up and down this field, it also tells you where it exactly lands. Now, the problem with measuring by wraps and all that is, like today, I've got a southerly wind coming across me. There's a big bow in the line, and at 150 metres plus, you are not going to straighten that bow out. So you could hit a clip at 40 wraps 160 yards, but the lead's actually dropped at 145 yards. And unless you're measuring over fields all the time, you won't know that, but that's what happens. But I've got this market in this field. I'm walking down to it, and let's see where it's landed. It should be around 150. It usually is for the last 3 casts. And once you get a feel for it, you sort of know how much power to put in it. The line I'm using, I got given by Outlaw Pro actually. They asked me to give it a go, and so far, all good. Really what I'm looking for is suppleness and strength. That's the main things for me, for casting at range anyway. It's looking a little bit right at the target and a little bit short. Oh, just pulled it out, just pulled it out. So there's the hole it come out of, and the wheel is there. So it's about, what, 1.5 yards right and 0.5 metre short. Look at that. Like, I measure in metric and imperial there. So let's say 1.5 metres to the right, 0.5 metre short, but that's 150 metres. 150 metres, which is nice, comfortable casting. Right, so there's a bit of advice for you, okay? I quite enjoy doing these actually, and I think it's a really good way of explaining rather than me writing loads of stuff down. So if you have got anything else that you want me to cover, or especially for the long range stuff, of course, as that's what I do a lot of, like casting, and in my fishing, I try and pick waters where I can fish at a little bit of range anyway. Yeah, just ask me on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, and I'm going to do a few more of these. I'm even going to do some about my fishing as well, which is a little bit different because I've done so much casting stuff over the years. And do you know what? I hope you get something out of it, because for me, the stage of my life now, it's just about passing on what I've learned, and I enjoy helping people. So any questions, please fire away.